he gets out and starts shooting at us. My husband saw him start shooting at us, and we got onto the median. I told my husband, he's coming like closer, like we need to get off the interstate. So my husband got back on the right side of the median, and we got off and we turned back on the service road coming back to Midland. And he shot at us again when he passed us. And thankfully he didn't hit us or anything.
Yet another mass shooting, the second in Texas in less than a month. The death toll has now risen to 7, with 21 others injured. Officials say the rampage started Saturday during a traffic stop when the suspect shot a state trooper and fled the scene. The shooter then went on a shooting spree in Odessa and hijacked a postal truck that he used while shooting at civilians on the street. Police say he may have used an AR-15 style rifle. The suspect was killed during a gunfire exchange with police in the parking lot of a movie theater. And officials say they still don't know a clear motive. We will expect an update from the Odessa Police Department later on today. And joining me now is MSNBC correspondent Garrett Haake, who's live from Odessa, Texas. Garrett.
Hey, Joy, yeah, I'm standing in that movie theater parking lot. Over the distance over my shoulder, you can see the mail truck that the suspect hijacked that ended this sort of scene here, this drama, the last place where we know that shooting occurred here. Still no word from police or the city about who this suspect is or what his motive might have been. We have only the barest details about the suspect, or the shooter in this case. A white male in his 30s, of course, matches the profile of so many other shooters in so many of these other cases that we've all covered. But the fact that this started with a traffic stop, and I think any reporter or anchor who uses the term routine traffic stop should be fined. You know, police say all the time there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. That was the case here. Officers approached this car, and the man was apparently shooting out the back window at them. The first person shot in this case was a police officer. You then had this rambling shootout scenario down the highway between Midland and Odessa that again ended here with a shootout with police. Now, we're several hundred miles from any major city here, which means some of the assets that have been pledged to help in this investigation are just arriving. We've got ATF agents who've been here on the scene this morning, scouring this scene here. Again, the final shootout, one of multiple crime scenes up and down the highway between Midland and Odessa, trying to put the pieces together. We're waiting on a news conference this afternoon. We're hoping right at noon here at Texas time with state and local officials, including the governor, about what we've learned specifically about this case. And frankly, what we're learning in Texas, if anything, that the state government here is going to do about these shootings. Remember, after El Paso, the governor put a commission together to study these acts of mass shootings. He's waiting on recommendations from them about steps that the state of Texas could take in lieu of the federal government doing anything, which, you know, as we've come to suspect, is not something that's going to happen anytime in the near future.
Garrett Haake, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, well, with congressional Democrats set to return to Washington, D.C. after Labor Day, once again, we as a country have an opportunity to actually do something about gun violence. The question is, will we? And what can Democrats do when the other party is completely in the hands and pockets of the gun lobby and the president is taking phone calls and orders from the NRA? Joining me now is political strategist Elena Beverly, DNC Communications Director Xochitl Hinojosa, Tiffany Cross of the Beat DC, MSNBC contributor Jonathan Capehart, Jason Johnson of TheRoot.com, and Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And I'm going to start with you, Shannon. What would you like to see done? Because we've seen little kids shot, people shot at Walmart, people shot in church, people shot at school, college. I mean, everywhere. Nothing's been done. What would you like to see done differently this time?
Well, we have to remember that 100 Americans are shot and killed in this country every single day, whether it's gun homicides in city centers or gun suicides in rural communities. All of it matters. And we know it is senseless and preventable, and that with action, it can be stopped. It is shameful that the Senate's inaction comes with a body count in this country. And every single American needs to reach out to their senator. You can do it by texting the word checks to 64433 and tell them that you demand that they act now on life-saving laws that are working in states, like a strong red flag law and a background check on every gun sale.
Well, those are things that are obviously very popular. Jonathan, I'm going to go to you on this, our man in D.C. here. And earlier, I kind of stumbled over the T's for this because it's 281 mass shootings so far, which I thought must have been a typo. 281 shootings all just in 1 year. Just two already in Texas in just less than a month. The House Judiciary Committee is going to come back and they're going to consider a few things: banning high-capacity magazines, stopping high-risk individuals from buying guns, stopping those convicted of hate crimes from owning guns. That seems pretty common sense. They're all popular. 89% of Americans favor Congress expanding background checks. 76% are for red flag laws. 75% support a voluntary program to buy back the weapons of war people are carrying around to Walmart. 62% favor banning sale of semi-automatic firearms, assault weapons. 25% are for banning handgun sales. So people are generally for gun reform. What are the chances that Congress will actually be able to pass something with Mitch McConnell still sitting around there?
Zero. I mean, that's the key. The majority of the American people, as you just recited, support all of these things. What was it? 95% support background checks. And yet one man from Kentucky, the Senate Majority Leader from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, is the one who is standing in the way of any of this stuff being considered. It's not like this is a political risk for anyone on Capitol Hill. The American people overwhelmingly support it, but Mitch McConnell won't do it. So even though Democrats are controlling the House and all these things can sweep through there in an afternoon, they'll go to the Senate and they will die. And it is until people in those ruby red districts take their 95% support and go to these district offices or go to Washington and protest at Mitch McConnell's office in the Capitol, that their voices will not be heard, because in the other ear, with a gigantic megaphone and cash, is the NRA. And the NRA, even though it's had a lot of problems that have been documented this past spring and summer, they still hold enormous power. I think, as you mentioned before, one day the president says he's for background checks, and then a phone call with the NRA, and the president backs off and is completely singing from the NRA hymn book. So nothing is going to change until there's a change in the leadership in the Senate.
But really quickly to stay with you for a moment, Jonathan, you just recently interviewed Joe Biden, because Joe Biden seems to somehow think that he can somehow work with Mitch McConnell if he becomes president of the United States. Does he still think that? Because given the fact that, as you've mentioned, the complete obedience that the Republican Party has to the NRA, the complete obedience Donald Trump has. They are obedient. I think that's the only word that's appropriate to their relationship with their bosses, the people who run the NRA. How in the world does the former vice president think that he can work with a guy like that?
Now, that was one specific question I wasn't able to ask him, because he has made it's one of his signature issues that I'm able to reach across the aisle. I did it while as President Obama's vice president. I've been on the Hill a long time. I have all of these relationships. But as we have discussed, basically since 2010, the kinds of Republicans that Vice President Biden was used to working with, they are a different breed of cat than the ones who are on Capitol Hill now. Even the ones who are on Capitol Hill now are even different and more doctrinaire and more dug in than the ones who came in during the Tea Party revolution of 2010. I don't think that the vice president fully understands that the days of Fritz Hollings and all of those guys who had a reverence for the Constitution, had a reverence for the institutions in which they served, those folks are gone. And so how you work with people who are enthralled to the President of the United States and enthralled to special interests like the NRA, how do you get them to work with you? I'm not sure how you do that, and that's why I think a lot of people, you've discussed it a lot on this show, that perhaps the only way to get things done is to not only have Democrats in control of the House, but to win back the White House, but imperative that Democrats retake control of the Senate.
Yeah, and according to Julian Castro, also get rid of the filibuster, because if you put Mitch McConnell back in the minority, all he's going to do is filibuster everything. Let's come to the table here, to the ladies at the table. And Xochitl Hinojosa, welcome to the show. And I'm glad that you're here, because I do want to talk about sort of the official Democratic position on some of this stuff. Democrats have been making a big deal out of all the things they're doing in the House. I know you're not the D-Trip, but still, we're going to talk about the House a little bit.
Of course.
Let's say they pass all of this stuff. Then what? What is the party prepared to do politically to take advantage of the fact that, for sure, Mitch McConnell's obedience to the NRA will continue?
Well, they already passed background checks, and the Senate can bring it up. The problem is that Mitch McConnell right now is Donald Trump's puppet, and he is not going to do anything unless Donald Trump says, bring a bill to my desk. And this is heartbreaking. I have an 11-month-old, and I was able to put my baby to bed last night, but there is a mom who couldn't because her 18-month-old was shot in the face.
And you're a Texan.
And I'm a Texan.
Yeah.
And let me tell you a little bit. I heard Garrett talk a little bit about, there isn't necessarily the political will for Republicans to do something nationally, and so they're banking on the state. Let me remind you, today, September 1st, Texas has more lax gun laws.
Yeah.
And that means that you can now have them in schools. You know what that also means? That means that there was just a man in Austin, Texas, which went unnoticed a few weeks ago. He was in a park with an AR-15. He had a warrant out for his arrest, and he was still able to buy a gun.
Yeah.
And so at some point, you know what? If Texas lawmakers aren't going to do anything, it is the president's responsibility to do something. And you're right. Democrats will do something in the House, but we can't get anything done without the American people speaking out, calling Mitch McConnell, calling, their elected leaders, calling these Republicans, and making it an electoral issue. That's why you have, Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, and a bunch of Democrats right now making this an electoral issue. And we have a debate actually in Texas just in a few weeks. And I bet you that this will be a huge issue, and all of those Democrats on that stage will want to do something about this.
Highly likely, yes. And Elena Beverly, also welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you,
and I know you through the Obama campaign.
That's right.
And so, President Obama had, I think, the most openly emotional reaction to a mass shooting that I've ever seen. It was incredibly moving when those little kids at Sandy Hook were murdered. And everyone thought, surely now, in this era, when you have an actual compassionate president who was at the point of weeping, thinking of his own children, these little kids were killed. Nothing happened. Right. Nothing has happened. People are killed in church. People are massacred at Walmart. Nothing. No, it doesn't matter. So is now the idea that maybe somebody needs to call the NRA, since apparently they're the boss, and apparently the president of the United States actually works at the NRA, not at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Maybe someone should call them.
Well, look. So we have some candidates out there right now who have said that they're going to take on the NRA, right? So we have Elizabeth Warren, who said that she's going to take on the NRA, that she, in her first 100 days in office, is going to, by executive order, pass gun reform, because we can't rely on Congress to do their job. We can't rely on Mitch McConnell, who's decided he's going to be the Grim Reaper for everything that's decent that we need in this country. And so we have candidates like Elizabeth Warren, we have candidates like Kamala Harris, who are saying in their first 100 days, they will pass these gun reform measures, the protections that we need, and they will take on the NRA with executive order. And I think that's the way that we're going to have to go unless the Democrats win the Senate back.
Yeah.
And we have candidates that are, and some states that are in play, including Georgia, including Colorado. We've got folks that are prepared to take on the gun lobby, but we first need to get our electoral map back.
Yeah, well, let's two of those candidates. Julian Castro, Tiffany, said this morning that he would be in favor of getting rid of the filibuster for legislation, the last place that you really have it, since they got rid of it for judges, in order to pass gun reform legislation. And let me play Beto O'Rourke for you, because this is now what he's about. And and I said to him, and I think it's true, I think it's obvious that he cares more about this issue than he cares about actually being president. Like, he cares about this the most. Here he is from this morning. Is this what you're running on at this point?
What else could I talk about right now? I think we've been constrained by polls and focus group tests and our fortunes in the next election. Put all that out of mind and then just focus on those kids and families and our fellow Americans who need us right now. That is all that you need to run a campaign the right way.
There's so much for Democrats to run on, but it sounds like one of the principal issues for 2020 is going to be gun reform.
It has to be. And listen, let me just put some meat on this bone about what Jonathan was talking about with the NRA. Mitch McConnell has gotten over $1 million from the NRA. They've spent just this cycle over $800,000 trying to elect Republicans. That's not including the $10 million they spent on lobbying Republicans to table bills, the $9 million they spent on TV advertising, and the $4 million they spent on opposing Democrats. We have to remind people they do not represent represent gun owners. They represent gun manufacturers. You embarrassed Matt Gaetz when he was on your show, I think it was like last year, and you asked him, you represent Florida, how many Floridians are members of the NRA? He had some ridiculous number. You said, no, it's actually not even a fraction of the number you said. This is what people have to keep in mind. We heard about the profile of this shooter, a white male shooter. That's a really big part of the problem, because let me tell you, when you go to these gun rallies and you see all these white people in fatigues saying, hey, over my dead body, you'll never take my guns. Imagine if there were a bunch of black and brown people in fatigues holding up guns saying, over my dead body. How quickly would we get these gun laws? And the reason why we have these gun laws, they came about in the 80s because the Black Panthers, or the 70s, I'm sorry, the Black Panthers armed themselves. And in the 80s, Ronald Reagan reversed a lot of these gun laws because they were nervous that black and brown people were actually arming themselves. So we have to also address that these rules come about, again, under a system of white supremacy and violent white rule. And this is why these kind of profile shooters they happen repeatedly. Imagine if it was an undocumented immigrant who did this, or a Muslim, or a black person. You can't tell me that this president's timeline would not be littered with how important gun rules are.
Absolutely.
We're never going to see that.
And Joy, I just want to say, Rashad Robinson earlier this morning said something that's really important. Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump don't care about these kids getting shot because it's not their kids. And it doesn't matter if they're black kids or white kids or Latinos. Yeah. They're not their privileged children, and that is part of the reason why we're getting
after Sandy Hook, Mitch McConnell was on a robocall talking about how Democrats and Barack Obama want to steal their guns. 2 months after we lost 20 children and 6 educators.
And you know, Jason, you know, the mayor of Texas in 2015 was tweeting about how Texas needs to catch up because they've fallen behind on being the place that sells the most guns. Greg Abbott apparently had commissioned a study to study mass shootings after the last or one of the previous massacres, I guess after the one in Walmart. But he also has signed into law 10 different pieces of legislation that, as of today, mean that an apartment owner can't tell their tenant that they can't have that stockpile of AR-15s that they're keeping in their apartment. They can't say no to it. A business has to let people walk into their business with whatever war weapon they want. They can't say no. And if the person is asked to leave, they just have to leave. What if instead of leaving, they just pull a mass shooting? There's nothing they can do. So, you know, I do wonder if even with presidential candidates fixating on this, if you wind up still with a calcified Republican Party that just maintains its obedience to the NRA no matter what.
Well, yeah, Joe, and look, there are similar laws that are happening down here in Georgia, right, where you can take guns in churches now. I want to also add that in Texas, yeah, and bars, right? Because, you know, drinking and guns go hand in hand. But even worse, you look at these new Texas laws. I mean, you're now allowed to keep guns in foster care. Care. You can bring guns and sit in the parking lot of a high school with a gun. And worse, the new piece of legislation says if you take a gun into a place where guns are not allowed and you didn't know, it protects you from prosecution. I mean, that's how bad this is. And if you look at Mike Conaway, who is the member of Congress, he votes with Trump 98% of the time. He's not going to do anything about what happened in Odessa, and these are his kids, right? This is Odessa. This is his district. He doesn't care. I hate to be sort of a nihilist about this, but I have felt this way for a very, very long time. If dozens of white children can be murdered in an elementary school, and this Congress and this Senate does nothing about it, I mean, that was the end of the gun debate. That was the end of the gun debate. The only way this changes is if Democrats, and we saw beginning of this in 2018, if Democrats become as intense about gun issues as Republicans are. Because right now you've got a situation where, yes, the vast majority of countries like, yes, we should have common sense gun reform. But the people who want to keep their guns, that's the only thing they care about. And Democrats have to operate in a space where this is our single solitary issue. They've got to go on a crusade like Beto O'Rourke is doing right now and say, this needs to be the only thing we care about. And only then will you see the kind of action, not just in Congress, but Congress basically saying, we will stop everything. We'll do a government shutdown if the Senate doesn't do something about this. And unless that changes, we won't see any changes, and we will continue to see this kind of grotesque violence probably every other weekend until the election.
Well, Shannon, over to you then. Can that happen? You know, Moms Demand Action has been very effective, particularly at the statewide level in sane states, to get gun reform passed. So there has been some movement at the state level. Is it possible to move the Democratic Party writ large nationally to fixate on this, to remove Republicans from power who will not comply with the majority of Americans?
We have been working on this issue almost 7 years in a bipartisan way. We passed stronger gun laws in 20 states in 2018, 9 of which were signed by Republican governors. So much has happened since Sandy Hook, and to say that nothing has happened is both cynical and dangerous. We are making huge progress. This is showing over and over again in polls to be the #1 issue, particularly for women as they go into 2019 and 2020 elections. We've played defense at a federal level. The NRA should have passed their priority legislation with a Republican president and a Republican Congress, and they couldn't. And that's because the gun violence prevention movement has become so strong. And we need every American to use their voice and their votes. And again, I would ask people to text the word checks to 64433 and tell your senator we need action now.
Elena, is there a Republican that's going to lose because of the gun issue in 2020?
Right.
Is there a Republican that's going to lose?
Yeah. Is there a Republican you can name that's going to lose? Mitch McConnell, any of the Texans?
No, I mean,
is there Republicans?
The short answer, honestly, the short answer is no. The short
Senator
answer is
Gardner.
no.
So Senator Gardner?
Yeah, well, yes. Because John Hickenlooper is going to win no matter what, right? Because he's brilliant he was brilliant in his city. He was brilliant for his state, but I don't know. I actually don't know if the Republicans are going to lose on this issue unless the Democrats make this their primary issue and are reaching out to the voters who care about this and say, we are going to make this the basis for whether or not someone can stay in office. And for example, Gen Forward is a millennial survey of Black and brown millennials primarily. And after criminal justice, gun reform is the most important issue. If you want to reach out to the next generation of voters, this is the issue that you are speaking to.
And Xochitl, I want to give you the last word on this because you're representing the party. And this has been the challenge, is that Democrats don't focus on the Senate, which is critical. They don't focus on guns, right? They don't focus on things except when they're in defense. They focus on health care when they're in defense of it. Can Democrats craft a message that makes it really simple? You know, law enforcement is terrified of individual Black drivers they pull over for having a traffic stop out. Shouldn't they be a bit more afraid of American warlords who've got an AR they can shoot out the back of the car? We have a completely wrong debate happening when we have both violence against individual African Americans for nothing, and people who are able to freely walk around like warlords from the 1980s in a third world country. Can the Democrats get that message together?
This will not only be one of the main issues, I think, going in for presidential campaigns in a primary, and I hope that they use it against Donald Trump, but never doubt the power of Nancy Pelosi. She is someone who is going to go in there. She is going to bring about change. She will get the caucus together, and she understands the importance of this, and already has with background checks, right? And I have no doubt that she will continue to talk about this. And a lot of people never expected for Democrats to pick up so many seats as they did in 2018. I think that if you have Republicans who continue to stick by Donald Trump, not only on guns, but on health care and every issue, they will lose, and you will see even more gains in 2020.
While I have you here, I can't let you go. Is she going to impeach him? Because being in the thrall of an outside entity, outside of government, and taking orders from a private entity, the NRA, it sounds like that might be a good article. You think, is she going to impeach him?
Well, right now she is doing everything she can to have that investigation move forward and make sure that they are doing this the right way. Because what she doesn't want to do, she doesn't want to politicize this. And so she's doing the right thing, and then we'll see in a few months what she decides to do.
Okay, you have to come back. We were going to have you want to talk about how you broke Fox News this week. They're still like tweaking it with the little wrenches and trying to put it back together with rubber bands and Band-Aids. You broke them this weekend. We're going to have you back to talk about that. Great. Elena Beverly, thank you very much. Welcome to the show, all of our great new guests. Xochitl Hinojosa, Shannon Watts, thank you very much always for your activism. Tiffany, Jonathan, and Jason will be back later in the show. And up next,